It's time for Talking Pictures Trivia. A quick friendly reminder, if you don't respect the Mew, you may slip and fall.
Welcome to Talking Pictures Trivia, the podcast in which a group of geographically challenged friends explore movies through trivia as an excuse to keep their friendships alive. I'm one of these friends, and today's host, Nick, and with me is...
Tom.
And KJ.
All right, great to have you back as always. Additionally, joining us as a guest for this episode is...
Steve.
Thanks for joining us, Steve. Steve and KJ work together, or it may be more accurate to say they are part of the same lunch group in the office. During these lunches, important topics are discussed and debated, including if hot chocolate counts as a snack or how long someone else's sandwich can be in the fridge until it's free game. Steve conveniently likes movies. For those joining us for the first time, we start off each episode with a movie quiz, as these pivotal questions will determine who earns today's trivia crown. Then, once the fierce competition is over, we followed up with our famous movie rant, where anything goes. KJ, tell us about today's movie.
Today we are going back to 1995. While dealing with the Oklahoma City bombing, O.J. Simpson was found not guilty, and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum opens in Cleveland. During all this, Christopher Monger's movie, The Englishman Who Went Up a Hill But Came Down a Mountain, was released in theaters alongside the third Die Hard movie, With a Vengeance, Casper, The Bridges of Madison County, and Braveheart. In The Englishman Who Went Up a Hill But Came Down a Mountain, we follow a mound of dirt whose mountain status is in question. During World War I, England is surveying Wales, which leads two Englishmen to a Welsh town to assess if Fannangaro is indeed a mountain or a hill. The town is populated with some very distinct characters who all come together to keep their town's identity under Fannangaro. I'd like to look at this movie as a modern-day fairy tale and possibly compare it to older fairy tales, or at least identify the parts of the movie that could be lifted directly from a fairy tale and see if it works as a modern-day fairy tale. Nick, if you had one word to describe the Englishman who went up a hill but came down a mountain, what would it be?
Cute. Tom?
Traditional. Steve.
Whimsical.
And my word would be charming. It's time for question 1. How does the sergeant at the beginning of the film first feel about the Englishman measuring the mountain?
Locked in?
Locked in.
I'll lock in as well.
All right, Steve, what do you have?
The sergeant, I can see his face, his look of disdain. Does he feel that they're daft?
All right, Tom?
I'd say he's upset and he thinks that you can't measure a mountain. Like, how do you measure a mountain? He's incredulous, I guess, would be the best word.
Nick?
He's not very happy about it.
All right, points go to Tom and Steve. Yeah, he looked at them like they're ridiculous. Like, why would anybody spend time measuring a mountain? Like, why? Why would you measure this mountain? Why did you drive all the way to our town to spend time to decide how tall the mountain is? And I kind of wanted to talk about how much of outsiders Hugh Grant, who plays Mr. Anson, and Mr. Garrett are in this Welsh town, right? These very proper British Englishmen in this Welsh town.
So my reading of the movie is that it's a movie about community and about how individuality is not something that structures a community, but comes out of a community. That the community sort of pre-exists the individual. And what you have which is very much a pre-modern idea, right? It's an idea that stands against modernity. And what you have with the two British folk is the embodiment of modernity, which is also taking on the form of an outsider, right? They're two outsiders. They're English. These Welsh people don't like the English. And not only are the English coming to take from them their central narrative, which is, we are at the first mountain in Wales, the very first mountain in Wales, they're also doing it in the service of a war, which is killing a bunch of these Welsh people who don't understand it at all. They don't know why they're in this damn war. And they're doing it using empirical scientific methods, which It's supposed to be dispassionate. Science is dispassionate, says Garrod to Anson. But in fact, of course, it isn't dispassionate, right? It's still being done within the context, some kind of context. In this case, a traditional context. That is, our community is the community of the mountain. We stood against the British, the Vikings, the what have you, and the empiricism and those kind of scientific methods, which are modern, are in the service of the Great War, which up to that point is the most modern of wars, right? This is where you had death machines be created that you had to stand 100 yards away from because they were so damn powerful. This war began with French generals wearing white gloves because it made them look like they were part of Napoleon's army, and it ended in the trenches, right? It ended with mustard gas. And so the outsiders are not only outsiders to the community, and humor comes out of those kind of misunderstandings. They're also representing modernity, which this community stands against.
Yeah, I agree with that, Tom. I also feel like the Englishmen passed through some kind of barrier when they got to the Welsh town. Um, not only are they outsiders, but I don't think Hugh Grant knows that he's an outsider while he's there, right? He seems immune to any of their mocking or.
I mean, I would push back. I think he becomes enculturated, right? I don't know if that happens immediately. I think that your kind of idea of borders is very important. It's also mentioned in the movie, right? That this is the border, and if you take away the mountain, it might as well be in England. We might as well the border dissolves. And I think your concept of fairy tale is very important in terms of tradition, because fairy tales are the narratives that a community tells that defines the community, right? In part, it's part of a larger narrative, I would say. But the idea of the fairy tale as something we tell, which is what the story is, right? It is a fairy tale that a grandfather is telling to a child, and at the end, that child is now telling it to us, right? Broadcasting it out. That fairy tale is a part of the larger way in which the community survives qua community.
Garrett is the one who's really the fish out of water, because he always speaks poorly or speaks down to not only the community but Wales itself. So I came from England and I'm in Wales, and it's almost like he's doing charity work by going into these little villages and measuring hills and mountains, whereas Anson, he never really buys into that dialogue. And that's when I think he starts to become attracted to this quaint type community versus the hustle and bustle of where they came from. And we even find later that he had a very bad experience in the war. So this simpler lifestyle might be much more attractive to him versus the hustle and bustle of Garrett, who surveyed all these wonderful places at different times.
I think from the question and that attitude from the sergeant, this is tantamount to walking into someone's home, okay, with a ruler and saying, I'm going to judge whether your curtains are any good or not. I mean, they clearly, there's a line from Cole Meany, when he says, to any trained eye, that is a mountain. He says, I mean, measuring it's absurd. Why would you need to measure a mountain? It's clearly a mountain. What came to my mind is, going to the doctor with a child and say, my child has a fever. Well, you're from Wales. Let me take their temperature. Well, I'm feeling their head. They're warm. They have it. So they have that natural fight again. And of course, however to pronounce his name, George Garrod, he is so condescending, because there's actually a little, sort of glasses half full with Anson saying, oh, this is a great little pub. And Garrod says, yes, I suppose, for Wales, with that big bushy British wonderful mustache, which later, when we see his vulnerability, right, laying drunk from gin in the bed and everything. But yes, I think that's that attitude from the sergeants prevails, and it's all part of their community. And so the outsider coming in, I mean, it would be bad enough if someone from Wales came in and said, we're going to measure it. but certainly coming from. And there's actually an interesting thing also when they give their reason. Just saying who they are. We're cartographers. We need to, and their attitude is, oh, that sounds really important. Like almost like you get paid for that to travel around and measure hills. It's absurd. Everyone there is doing something that's needed. Are you the butcher? Are you are you the priest? Are you the barkeep? I mean, they're there for a reason. Everyone fills their, it's so superfluous during a war. Like to them, we're measuring hills, really? Or why don't you count the clouds? What you're doing doesn't seem to make any important sense here. So anyway.
Steve, to that point, there was one line where they said he's explaining how they measure the mountains from other different mountains. And then the one guy just says, well, who measured the first mountain?
Yeah, they do that in a couple of different ways. And my favorite one is when Thomas Toop and Thomas Toop 2 click, 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 click. And then Williams the Petroleum says, well, no wonder they got it wrong. Like now they're casting doubt and shame on their scientific method. Yeah, that's really good.
The process.
Yeah. I wonder they got it wrong.
Yeah. And the goat kind of says something like that in the church. He says, who decided 1,000 feet is a mountain and below that is a hill, right? There's still the idea of objectivity is being taken apart in this movie. These aren't people who really have a lot of kind of patience for objectivity, right? They're concerned with, like, as you're saying, what is your role in the community? And even people who are maybe not getting along, such as the Reverend and the goat, still are both community minded, right? And it's only the schoolmaster who isn't, right? So even the internal battles within the community are like, not really, they're not external to the community, right? Once the community is threatened, we come together, right? Once the community's fine, you can like bicker and all that stuff.
To add a little flavor to that with the school teacher, the schoolmaster, there's that line where they're taking the sod from the field and he was really outraged about it. And Johnny goes to him, something to the effect, you're talking like you're English, when he was complaining about it. So it's interesting to see it on both sides.
Yeah. And the Reverend, when the schoolmaster says you can't take the children, the Reverend grabs him and he says, there's a lot to be desired with your vocabulary and your community mindedness, right? You're not community minded.
It's because those relationships, however they are, that running theme of, I don't want to have to tell everyone you're the reason we failed.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
great by the goat.
Peppered through the movie.
Yeah. But he's right. Community comes first, individuals come second, right? Individuals come out of this community. And the goat and Jones, for all their differences, have an extremely intelligent, or maybe not intelligent isn't the right word, they have an understanding of that.
The thing about this objectivity and empiricism really comes up when Reverend Jones and Davies the school are basically arguing over what's a mountain. And Davies the school, it comes out a little bit from him. And of course, you remember, he's the one that does not help. He's the one that lets out. And he says, well, in the Himalayas, this which is something like a scientist would, and and the Reverend is beside himself. And he says, oh, I thought you were an educated man. And I should think it'd be 5,000 feet or something like that.
Yeah.
So that is peppered
exactly.
It's time for question 2.
Hi, Price is Right rules. So whoever gets closest without going over. What is the first estimate given of the mountain by Garrod after the first day of measuring in feet?
Locked in.
Locked in?
Do I have to convert it to anything else?
Nope, just straight feet. This is an English situation.
Right. I also have the mountain in stones, if you need to know its weight.
Really?
That's fantastic.
I'm kidding. I don't know.
Oh, I was going to say, the height I can imagine measuring, but the weight.
I have some British descendants, so
Who weighed the first mountain?
Locked in. Sorry.
All right, Tom, what do you have?
The first estimate on the first day that is not official is 930.
I have 930 feet.
I locked in a number, so I will not change it. I had 980, but I think I might be wrong. I think that's what the gentleman wanted to change his bet to. But my answer is 980.
All right, points to Tom and Steve again. Yes, 930. So I want to talk about the mountain, which I felt like was a character in this movie.
Do you mean the hill?
Right. Fanangaro. And I just love how it's always looming. You get so many shots through windows. It's as if you could almost see it from anywhere you were in the community. It was part of the community. It was the community.
It's the guard against outsiders, right? It is the presentation of the community and also the border of Wales from, from England, the thing they think of as the other, right? The external. And the community exists by virtue of the rules of the community, which require borders, which require the designation of other, even if it's a kind designation. And in terms, I'm trying to bring this, or trying to think of your hypothesis, KJ, about fairy tales, right? And how the mountain kind of speaks to that. And it's interesting. The most fantastical element, or maybe the only fantastical element in the movie is at the end when we hear the Reverend speak, his body speak, right? This kind of a voice from the grave. And the kind of the fairy tale tends to, if you think of like the Grimm's brothers and those types of fairy tales, which come from these very small German principalities and German staats in different places, they tend to affirm the virtues of that community, right? They tend to give a little more definition, a little more narrative. And I think the Reverend being buried on top of the mountain that he built, right? He built it for the community and he builds it on top. And then once it begins to sink, once the community allows it to sink, right, it starts to be pulled away from God himself. The kind of the voice from beyond the grave comes out and tells them to build it again, build it back up. And I think that's sort of the fairy tale element is it's, maintain this community. Right. This is the virtue, that you maintain this community.
There's something very interesting about the hill or the mountain. There's the dancing around, not calling it a mountain. Anton says hill in the smallest of voices when he says hill, or he's also when he's talking to Morgan the goat says this elevation, your affection, dancing around it. But if you remember in the beginning of the film, when they go to that window and the sergeant and Morgan the goat, they look out that window at the hill like it's a family member, like this is what defines us. And it is affection that, he mentions it later. Anson does. They have a love for this hill, and it also, I think, represents something permanent. So their homes are very small. Their gardens are very small. They've been decimated by the war and all, but nothing has ruined this mountain. And they even mention it explicitly later, saying that whenever they were invaded by the Saxons and the Normans, this was the beginning of their safe zone, because once they got up there, the mountains and the rain is what kept all their defeaters from going there. And I mention that because the way they look out the window, they both look out the window like they're looking at a child's photo and say, Fenengaru, and when he says, what? Because of the Welsh pronoun, he says, oh, I'll write it down for you. Like they're very proud of it. So that is, I would agree that it's as if it's a character in the movie. I think that's a great observation.
So when we look at it, the elevation, as it were, is a member of the community. In fact, it is symbolic of the whole community. This community doesn't have much, but the one thing they have is this, in their mind, mountain. And that's what really ties them together. It's also their history, and they want it to be their legacy. They are the border between Wales and England. So it's not just from the other invaders, it was even from within Okay. So there's some pride in that, and they do not see themselves as inferior, but that is kind of a landmark that drives the whole community together. So there's more to it than just a lot of dirt.
After round 1, Tom and Steve are tied at 2. Nick will hopefully get some points next round. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. It's time for Guess That Song, Lilting Edition. I'll lilt a song, and you guess what it is. Here we go. Hey, dum dum day. Hey, dum day. Hey, dum day, hey, dum day. Hey, dum day, dum day. Hey, dum day. Hey, little dum day, little dum day, hey, dum day, hey, dum day. Hey, dum day. Hey, dum day, dum. Hey, dum. If you guessed head, shoulders, knees, and toes, you're right.
And we're back. We're at that critical point of the episode where we ask the guest a key question. Steve, if you could watch this movie with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
I think, after watching this again, that I'd actually like to, and he passed. I'd like the actor who played the Reverend Jones. I'd like that adorable old man to sit and ask him about his thoughts about the movie and about what it represented and other things.
That actor's name is Kenneth Griffith.
Kenneth Griffith, right. He was in 4 Weddings and a Funeral also, and had a very small part, but had a hilarious line also with Hugh Grant. Hugh Grant says something to him as idle chit chat, and he says, "Don't be ridiculous. He died years ago." And they have this very funny exchange in 4 Weddings and a Funeral. That's the only other thing I've seen him in.
His character name was Mad Old Man at Wedding 1.
Don't be ridiculous.
You guys see Waking of Ned Devine? Have you guys seen that?
Yes.
It's also got a bunch of old Irish in this case. But Steve, that would be hilarious to have a room full of these older actors and have them all commenting on the movie or making the jokes. Or
Yes.
that would
Yes. And comment on tell the cultural stories, because there's a ton of them, and how funny they would be.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and disagree with each other. No, that's
right,
not how it.
Right. It's actually part of what I enjoy of Kenneth Griffith's performance in this movie is this being very godly, being an old-fashioned reverend, but at the same time having this anger, particularly with Morgan the goat, but almost funnier with Davies the school, getting mad at the teacher for not, and being so passionate. His ability to go from that, and when he gives that heartfelt speech about who's died for the war and everything, he's in tears when he tells that. But he could turn on a dime right after that heartfelt performance and walk out and put his finger right in Morgan's face and say, "But don't for a second think you can sell alcohol on the Sabbath." And that was one thing that actor was able to really do, was go from this sweet old man to this curmudgeon, this volcanic curmudgeon. And I think that brought a lot to the movie.
It's time for question 3.
What does the Reverend answer to Thomas Tope's question about who measured the first hill?
Locked in.
Locked in.
Locked in.
Nick, what do you have?
God.
Tom?
The same thing. God.
God, my boy.
Yep. Points for everybody. And we've kind of been talking about this, but the Reverend versus the goat. That was such a great It wasn't even a competition. I don't even know what you call it. It was an ingrained,
Like a rivalry almost.
yeah,
Like, I don't
rivalry.
know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's an internal disagreement, right? We have external and internal disagreement, and internal disagreements are they have a shared understanding of the rules, but they're still going to fight it out, right? If you think of chess, a game of chess, it's two people fighting it out, but they don't disagree about what a pawn does, right? Pawns don't scale the board, and it's the same thing there, where there's still an agreement that this community needs this mountain as mountain, um, and or what this community needs is going to be very different. It needs the bar, it needs the church. The church doesn't think the community needs the bar doesn't think the community needs the church, whatever. They can kind of work that out. And what ends up happening is the kind of loveliness of the movie is I thought Jones was going to be a bad guy, and he wasn't. He was one of the heroes, and that they actually can see the sort of the the most virtuous people in this town are Jones and the goat. And Jones at the end acknowledges that, because as he's dying, he says, come here, I know you can carry out my wishes, because the kind of virtues that we value, it has emerged from this conflict. And I could see you embody that virtue. A scene I thought really embodied this, which was it went in a direction I didn't expect, was the initial meeting after the mountain is discovered to be a hill. And they have a meeting, they go to the church or the town hall, and they're discussing it. And the reverend wants to put forth a petition saying let's argue for its placement, Fidangaro's placement on the map as a mountain. And the goat responds, no, we have to build it, right? We have to make it larger. And then the young man who was in World War I, who hasn't been speaking, kind of says, we build trenches that were 10 miles long. We can do this. And what you see there is the kind of town hall democratic system that really embodies the community as community making a decision. And though Jones doesn't get his way, right, his solution is not the one that's promoted. The solution of the community is one he accepts and embraces wholeheartedly. He is still, it's still another communitarian type observation, right? He doesn't, when he sits down and kind of sinks his head, he doesn't become the curmudgeon who opposes this, right? Which I thought was going to happen. I thought was going to be the bad guy. But no, it's like the community has spoken. And this is our system of dealing with this stuff. They have spoken. This is what we're doing.
I just wanted to insert that the character's name was Johnny Shell-Shocked, although his last name was Jones. So I wonder if he's related to the Reverend. Blood's last name is also Jones.
In the beginning, you learn that everybody is Williams, Jones, or Evans. That's right. And so they have to amend. They have to amend it. True. It's Williams, Jones, or Evans. And so we have Evans the Butcher and Evans the End of the World.
Yes.
Well, now we got Johnny Shell-Shocked.
Yeah. What I really liked about that play between the two is that, and he even mentions it in one of his sermons, really Morgan the Goat represents the significant part of what's wrong with the world to the Reverend, especially in the beginning of the movie. He looks out at the congregation and sees all these ginger babies. And the implication, without them coming out saying it, is that Morgan the Goat has fathered a lot of these babies because the men did not come back from war. So you imagine every week Reverend Jones is kind of seeing those babies. And of course, you're led to believe that very, very few people do not go to chapel. It's like an unusual thing for you not to go to chapel if you live in that town. But Morgan the Goat never goes to chapel. So there's all this. They are two different worlds, and then, but this outside force brings them together, and reluctantly, slowly, as they come together. And that town meeting is that Tom just talked about, is the pivotal moment when that happens, and but watching that, and then for that all to come together when he's on his deathbed, that Morgan the Goat's the one he wants to talk to because he knows he can do it. But that interplay is wonderful throughout and even when he finally makes it to go to chapel that Sunday, that wonderful scene where he he basically, Morgan the Goat goes to the church to convince Reverend Jones to let everyone out of chapel so they can work on the mountain. And he's like, no, we're having, and he's trying to convince him. And he then goes and shows up, but he's got that shirt that doesn't fit and no one will let him in their row. And he goes, but it all, comes together. And then that's a real fairy tale moment. The big fairy tale moment for me is that this is almost all coming together. And you're led to believe that maybe he won't let them work on a Sunday and that it won't happen. And then even with the like a light on the Bible, he sees that passage about the holy hill. That's the fairy tale.
Mhm.
That's divine intervention there. That's to me the big fairy tale moment. And the look on Reverend Jones's face when he walks in, he's walking in with the Bible. He's got a smile this big, like it's all coming together.
How big was it?
Yeah, right.
The other big fairy tale moment was at the town hall when Johnny Shellshock speaks, right? Because he speaks very rarely, or maybe not
Yes.
at all before that, and it's almost a micro miracle that he spoke, and then that was the solution, right? That's another kind of fantastical thing that happens.
Yeah, and if we're moving into kind of fairy tale territory, I think talking or telling or narrating is central to the fairy. That to me is the most fairy tale-esque moment, is the fact that we have this frame narrative, which then is also not only a frame narrative, but it's a frame narrative that transmits to the next generation. And fairy tales are things that are repeated over and over again through the generations. Look at Disney, right? Disney is made its living off repeating the fairy tales of Prussia, basically. And now they're doing Marvel movies. But I guess we have our own fairy tales. But that is for me, the fairy tale, the most fairy tale thing is the fact that we tell these stories, right? That these are stories that we tell to explain the world in which we live. Did this stuff really happen? I don't know. Finnegan isn't actually a real place, right? This is made up for the movie itself. And the movie is talked about in the frame narrative. At the end, they go, just before this movie was completed, the mountain was remeasured, and we learned it was 997 feet. And then the old folks signal the young folks to bring up the dirt. So even the movie itself becomes the fact of the movie, the materiality of the movie becomes a contributor to the fairy tale. It becomes a retelling of this story, which explains the fantastical place of Finnegan, but also it explains maybe Wales.
That's a really good point. You could almost see the page turning with the words on one side, like the point at the end. I mean, normally having things narrated like that in absent of the fairy tale text would be annoying. But that part where they say, but fate would have one more, and they lead right into Reverend Jones. But I mean, normally, why are you narrating? Why is this? But that really added to it. Yeah, to what you just said.
I read that this is based on something that does exist, because there actually is a burial mound on top of this elevation, and you actually can't go up there because it's based on like some historical artifact kind of. So there is some place that this was based off of.
Yeah, it's based on. It's not a real place. Like the story isn't real. It's somebody
No,
told
not
that
the story is real. The story is not. Well, the story is, it's fiction, okay, but I think there is a mountain that this is based off of.
Yeah, but there's no Finnegan. There's like a mountain they filmed on, and there's ideas, but there's not.
Yeah, it says I was reading something. It said it was based after Christopher Monger's story from his grandfather about the real village of Taftswell in the county of Glamorgan and its neighboring Garth Hill.
Right. I think the story is about Garth Hill, but Garth Hill's not where this was filmed. So it's kind of a mixture of.
Exactly.
And it's and they're also they're also. I don't know if this really this didn't happen. And
no, the story is false.
Yeah.
All I'm trying to say is
And
there is a mountain
Mhm.
called Garth Mountain that actually does have that mound on top of it where they filmed those scenes, and that goes back to a Bronze Age burial mound. That's all I was trying to say. There, the actual
it's
elevation does
yeah,
exist, and there is some stories around it that were modified into this story.
yeah. I mean, that's how that's how fairy tales work too, right? They take pieces of culture and they contextualize them within a narrative, and that's the important thing about narrative and this type of thing as well, right? Narrative explains the world regardless of its facticity. Facticity is actually sort of not really relevant, right? It's how does the narrative explain our world and explain our virtues.
It's time for question 4.
Going into the final question, Nick has 2 points, Tom and Steve have 4, so it's still anybody's game. This final question we're going to do as a point for each thing you can think of, as dangerous as this has been on previous episodes. So feel free to write this down, guys, however you want to do this. But the question is, what do the Welsh use to prevent the English from leaving?
Oh boy.
Locked in.
Well, I'll stop overthinking then. I'll just say locked in.
Yeah, locked in.
All right, Steve, what do you have?
Okay, I have sugar in the gas tank of the car. 2 pounds. It's rationed. Punctured tires from the good Reverend Jones. I have the breaking of the part that he called the Bethingaru, which, by the way, in Welsh evidently means thingamabob. It doesn't mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
Also, faking that there were no trains, making the station master say there was no trains. And there was 2 things with the trains. One, that there were no trains. And then after the revelation that there were trains, claiming that there was flooding on the line. And so that was another thing they couldn't leave on the train. And is that all I have? I think waiting for the part is connected with breaking the Bethingaru, so that really should be 1 and not 2.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they were paused. I mean, they didn't make it rain, but when it rained and giving Garrett a lot of gin and him getting completely plastered. I don't know if that was holding them there or he was just drinking while they were delayed.
I'm not the judge, but I would think that was his own doing because he asked for the
for the
gin.
Yeah. So that's all I have.
All right. So I'm going to go with 5, which is the sugar, the tires, the Bathengaru, and then lying about the trains and lying about the trains. Nick, what do you have?
I have a different 5. Well, I have most of his same 5, but I have something that's different. The car with the sugar in the engine, the car with the tire. I missed the broken piece, so I don't know if you're counting that as separate or part of the whole car situation. I have the train, only coal cars. The train left yesterday going north, so you missed it. And then Lady Elizabeth. Morgan the Goat requests Lady Elizabeth to come back to keep them entertained so that they won't be in a rush to leave.
All right, I'll give you 5 for that. Sugar, tire, train, and Lady Elizabeth. Tom, what do you have?
I'm going to try and read my handwriting. So good luck, folks.
-2.
Yeah. So I start with the 2 pounds of sugar in the car. And then after that, the tires being flattened by the Reverend, the knife in the tire. After that, I had it Thingit which was like the piece in the car that they said they needed to replace, which I thought meant thingamabob from a car. I think gar meant car, but maybe it just means thingamabob. So there's
It's okay. I saw something else that called it a whatchamacallit, but I think it's
whatever. It's whatchamacallit.
up to translation.
Fair enough. At which point they offer him a drink. They offer the older British men a drink, which looked intentional to me. So I'm gonna put that. Then the train not being there. And then he goes, well, good God, man, I just heard it. And he says it's a coal car. When he comes in later, he says the same thing, like it's going north. And there's no trains today on Sunday. So the second time he clarifies what he meant, and he says there is just no trains on Sunday. So I think that's the same thing. Then there is Lady Elizabeth, rain in the car. Now that's iffy because they take the tarp off the car to cover the mound to prevent it from melting away in the rain. However, that does seem to delay them. And I was on the edge if that was intentional or not. And I think that is everything.
Not to be the judge, but I think we each got 5, but they weren't the same 5, unless KJ counted something that.
I think we all got each one at least twice. So 2 people at least got each one.
But if you both got each twice and then he got one once, I'm not sure how that adds up if we bring it all.
I think it's I just
Yeah.
kept talking, so I think I had more.
All right, Tom, I'm going to give you 6 points. Sugar Tire, the Baton Train, and Lady Elizabeth, which makes Tom the winner.
What's his 6? What's his 6?
Sugar Tire, the Baton Train, Lady Elizabeth.
Yeah, I was gonna say I didn't mean the train is 2. I was just explaining how because I don't think it's 2 train things.
There
We
is 2
can,
train
I can
things.
do that, but then it's 4. Then everybody else gets 4 because I
No,
counted the
there's 2 train
twice for
things because they go
everybody
back
else.
twice to the train.
They go back twice, but it's the same delay tactic, right?
Either
No.
way, then
It's
in
a
other
different
words,
excuse.
One was
One
actually one of them was a little bit of a subtle thing. We said, yeah, we have trains, but they're only going north. And they're like, well, that's where we wanted to go. And he's like, well, I assumed you wanted to go east. There's no
East.
trains going.
Yeah, no,
anywhere."
I know that, but isn't
And
that
he's
part
like,
of
why-
the same dupe? Right, the first
Well,
2
no,
No,
the
it's the
second
second
train
day.
dupe
Yeah.
is flooding on the
No,
lines.
he goes-
Either way,
He's trying to
yeah.
say
I'll
that
get
it doesn't
2
matter because we
points, or
all
you
said
get
it
okay.
right.
1 point.
I got
Yeah,
it.
everybody
I
got
still
it.
don't know how
Okay,
Tom
yeah.
got 6 though because I don't.
So Tom got 6 points. Sugar, Tire, the Baton Train, and Lady Elizabeth, making Tom our winner tonight.
Yay.
Congratulations.
Mhm.
I think the mountain made it rain because it wasn't completed. So it forced them to stay in the location until it could be done. Mountains actually do affect clouds and rain and all that on a serious note. So I
On a
think that's
serious
kind of what they tied it.
weather-related note,
Yes. This just in.
I enjoyed the way everyone pulled together and lied when they had to. When he said, well, all right, the car is shot and by the way, I cannot say Cardiff anymore without saying Cardiff when he says how far it'd be like us. Well, we got to get it from New York. It's like a piston. We have to get it from New York. And Cardiff. Then he says, what about like anything else, like a horse-drawn car, like anything? And he's like, well, no, they're all being used. And he stops. And he says, what? For the war.
That was a good save.
Yeah. And the station master lying and everyone like just all in it together.
What was great about that, Steve, is we don't see them coordinating that. It's just known. Like everybody on there. It's not like Morgan the Goat went around, okay, you're going to say this and everyone's just on board. It's just understood.
Right.
Yeah, they certainly do. They get trapped there. And it's interesting. I found the Hugh Grant plot line and Lady Elizabeth plot line to be sort of jammed in there.
Yeah, a waste of time.
It was.
Yeah.
It came late. It came. The love interest came over an hour into the movie.
Mm-hmm. And part of
Yeah.
it,
Or around that.
yeah, part of it they try and kind of shoehorn into what you're talking about, KJ, the fairy tale thing, or what I'm calling the narrative of place. In the sense that what happens when you go up on a mountain through the night? You become a poet, you become a madman, you become very, very wise, or you become engaged, right? And so it is sort of positioned. And also the story is the fairy tale is generated from apparently somebody in the town whose last name is the Englishman who came up who went up a hill and came down a mountain, right? So the story is the fairy tale is explaining. It's a fairy tale of explanation. It's how this place was founded, right? It's closer probably maybe to like the Aeneid and the way that the English sort of use Aeneas as sort of like the founding person of London, or the founding person of England, or how we think of the twins Romulus and Remus being the founding children of Rome. And if you ever go to Rome, there's just wolves sucking babies throughout the city, just statues of wolves, with teats and babies sucking on it, because their founding myth, which I'm sure didn't happen, is so so important to that. And I think the fairy tale of this is kind of like a founding fairy tale, right? It's how this place, maybe not how this place survived, right, or maintained itself in the face of this kind of adversity. What's interesting or different about it from your normal fairy tale is that there is a date, right? It's 1917. This is when this happens. There's a modern condition. There's the war going on. Hugh Grant's character has just come back from Verdun, right? Which is, as detailed and as documented as any battle up to that point. So there is this not only clash of worlds, the external world, the threatening world, the modern world, and this traditional place. There's even this kind of clash in the way the story is being told. We don't really have a Romulus and Remus story about the two brothers who then they grow up and they fight each other, and Romulus wins and he establishes the kingdom of Rome, because those stories are old enough that we can um, we can use distance to impose the fantastical. While in this story, it's the fairy tale is hitting up against the modern, right? And it's almost as if the modern threatens the fairy tale kind of world. And in the end, with the generation taking over, the young person taking over the storytelling, it's almost like he saves the fairy tale from modernity itself.
I would say the relationship between Anson and Betty is the strongest correlation to fairy tale, because that's how things happen in these type fairy tales with relationships. They meet, they fall in love, they kiss on top of a mountaintop, and they come back engaged to be married. Like, it's just like they speed through all that other stuff in fairy tales. So I think that's why they tried to squeeze this one in to support KJ's, I don't know, angle lens to look at this movie. But it did seem quite forced. I enjoyed the flow of the rest of the movie, and that's why my word was cute. Because if I'm asked, I'd be like, oh, that was a cute movie, interesting. But that part seemed the most fantastical to me of all things, because it seemed a little out of reality.
You guys recognize her, Betty, from any other popular, more modern shows?
She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her.
Game
I
of
did not grow up.
Thrones?
Yeah, she's Stannis the Manus' wife. She's a Baratheon.
Oh, yes. She's the one who believes, to actually convinces him to believe in the Lord of Light.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. She won an award for playing Ophelia in the 90s.
It's time for Movie Rant.
I was telling KJ, I remember this period very clearly. This was independent film is nothing new, but it surged in the 90s. People were getting bored with the studio films, and it was so big that they were getting worried that the Academy Awards were completely filled with these independent films all of a sudden. And I remember a number of these, and I really didn't realize how many Hugh Grant was in around this time, but he was in like 3 within 1 year. And it reminded me, when I went to look at some of the notes from the movie about that time, and these actors were showing up in a lot of things, and some of them other independent movies that were being made over there, a lot of these actors and actresses were in.
Yeah, because when I saw this poster, I had assumed it was another rom-com he was in. So I don't know if the poster was made when they knew he was going to become a rom-com type star, or how that worked. But I was pleasantly surprised when you had recommended it, Steve, that it was not just a Hugh Grant rom-com, and it was something different.
Yeah.
When I was watching this, with my wife, I said, I think this is actually a drom-com. Because I was like, it was like drama, romance, comedy. Because there's not a lot of romance. They just kind of tucked it in at the end there,
making the movie poster a little bit deceiving. Yeah.
Was he in 4 Weddings by that point? I think 4 Weddings was 94.
Yeah. And right after this was 9 Months with Julianne Moore. where, as I told KJ, my personal opinion is Hugh Grant's funniest line he ever uttered, which is she tells him she's pregnant and he crashes his Porsche into a truck or crashes it into a ditch. And he says, I thought we were using birth control. And she says, well, it's only 93% effective. It says it on the box, to which he says, so 7% bloody ineffective. They should put that on the box. And he's getting into one of his British, hissy fits.
He does a lot of twitching almost, right? Like it's almost like.
Yes. Well, the thing is, they were surprised in Four Weddings and a Funeral. He had that. People thought that hair was stylish when actually the director, and he intended that to look ridiculous. They wanted him to look, out of sorts and ridiculous, but then
befuddled,
yes. But he was in, I want to say 5 or 6 movies in like 2.5 years. That was his, when he got very big.
Yeah.
But this movie was a little different. It wasn't like Notting Hill in 1917. It was, it had that, the characters and the different nature of it.
I'd like to once again congratulate our winner of the week, which is none other than Tom. Congratulations.
Thank you. Hey.
On another note, check out our website, talkingpicturestrivia.com, for more information about us and our episodes. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as our YouTube channel. We are extremely grateful for any positive reviews, as those help others like you find us. If you like what you hear, remember to like and subscribe to our show. Do you think Finnegarrow should be classified as a hill or a mountain, and why? Let's continue the conversation on Twitter at Talking Studios. Have additional thoughts? Email us at talkingpicturestrivia@gmail.com or give us a call at 201-467-8679 for a chance to be featured on one of our future From the Listeners episodes. Thanks again, Steve, for joining us today. Where can people find you?
You may find me at your local pub.
And you can find me at Thomas Slayman 15 on Twitter. And also I recorded a Talking Pictures Trivia B-side on this film. So that is a different podcast thread. If you want to jump on there and hear me ramble on for 25 minutes about this film, please do so.
And you can find me on Twitter at KJ10001000.
I can also be found on Twitter at The Nicknamed. Join us next time when we start our series on Best Picture nominees and discuss Nick's, which is my recommendation, from 1993, The Fugitive. There's a lot that I could have chose from, but that's the one I chose. Should be a fun one. Talk to you then. Ding, 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 ding.
Can I interject one thing?
Sure.
Quick. It might not matter. The name of the movie is The Englishman Who Went Up the Hill. Not
I keep saying men, right? The Englishman.
Yes.
Yep.
But that's what you have written in the script. So
there's a lot of times KJ doesn't read what he wrote.
Yeah. No, I have trouble with the Englishman. I don't know why. The Englishman, like that man over there is an Englishman. So, yep.
I'm fine with it. I don't even care.
Yeah.
I'm just making sure you knew. That's all.
I'll get a text from Kagar. I guarantee it.
Well, no, actually, I'll share with you guys, and KJ will probably remember this, but my kids are older now, teenagers, and I have one son in college, but I went through this period with having little kids where I kind of didn't see grown-up movies for a while. So the fun thing was I'd be coming in 7 years after a wonderful movie that everyone loved.
Oh, so this is good.
Extolling. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So what I remember was coming in and going to lunch and saying to KJ and Kagar, Fight Club? And they're like... This was like 8 years after it came out.
You got the memo on that
Steve,
one, huh?
Well done. Yes, we all know that it's a good movie, Steve. Right up there with KJ thinking that the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark was the submarine scene.
Submarine, yeah. Growing up,
I'll never forget.
My mom always turned it off at the submarine. He got the ark. They're all done.
Really?
Good to go. Yeah. It wasn't until college or something. I was like, wow, there's a lot more to this.
That's like my favorite part with all the face melting and the ghosts and all that. Like,
that was new to me.
Yeah. It's funny that
why did you bring that up on our Raiders episode?
I wasn't on it.
Oh, you weren't. That was like the first episode. You were in the editing box.
Mhm.
Okay.